The City of Pembroke Pines and the Frank C. Ortis Art Gallery are pleased to present Conversations with the Curator, a discussion program featuring prominent curators, gallery directors, exhibition coordinators, and more. Conversation topics will include each curator's career development story, advice to artists for exhibition proposals, favorite exhibition concepts, and endearing behind-the-scenes anecdotes. Artist Michelle Weinberg received her BFA from the School of Visual Arts in New York City and her MFA from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. She is the recipient of awards and fellowships, including a Pollock-Krasner Foundation Award, a South Florida Cultural Consortium Fellowship in Visual and Media Art, an Individual Artist Fellowship and Artist Enhancement Grant from the state of Florida, and many more. Her work has been exhibited at venues such as the Wolfsonian Museum, Emerson Dorsch Gallery, Curator & Co. in Sydney, Australia, and the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery at Edison State College. Weinberg is Creative Director of Girls Club in Fort Lauderdale, and she consults with museums and nonprofits to develop exhibitions, educational programming, and more. All right, Michelle, it is such a joy to have you on our podcast today. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me. I know that our listeners will be so thrilled to hear about you, your story, and all of the advice and insights that you're prepared to share with them. This podcast really does aim to give us an inside look at your life. So why don't we start from the very beginning? Tell me about yourself as a child or as a teen, and let me know about the early signs of your love for the arts.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. And it is a pleasure to connect to folks out in the world via electronic communications. So, yes. So, yeah, childhood. I was very lucky. I was born in New York City, and my parents were already fans of arts. So I grew up being exposed to the ballet and museums and theater and music performances. And in my home, my mother made all that stuff available to me. And I remember as early as 5 years old saying I wanted to be an artist. So lots of incredible impressions of all those things, art and theater in particular, being very profound for me. And in addition to, I always say, like, Matisse, Persian miniatures, Warner Brothers cartoons being like three biggest like visual kind of graphic imprint experiences of my young life. And then when I was a teenager in high school, I feel that that's the time when young people sort of join the cult of bohemia. And this is something I've seen in my years of working with teenagers as well, that it's a time when you sort of stake out your identity and you profess your allegiance to creative endeavors. And in high school, I was involved in theater and dance, things that were more social, as well as visual art. But the idea of being part of a group that was doing creative things and skipping regular classes often to do those things was fabulous. So that was a big part of my teenage life. And then when it came time to apply to college, I realized that although I spent a lot of energy on performing arts in high school, that I didn't want a career in performing arts. I didn't want to audition. I didn't want to ask for permission to do my work. I wanted to be the sole creator of my work, and so visual arts seemed the best. I also have always been a mad, crazy reader, writer, and so visual art seems to me to relate to those things in terms of symbols and communication and the picture space and ideas and concepts. So less about my physical body and expressions and more about something abstracted in that realm.
Right.
So yeah, so I became an artist. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City and got a BFA. And then a few years after that, I went to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia and got an MFA. And I think I always felt absolutely focused on my own path. Was not into being a famous artist or having to be a famous artist. I didn't like competition and social climbing that seemed to be a part of the art world. Even though I participated in that, I went, I worked for, I enjoyed, I was conversant, I read, blah, blah, blah. But I did not feel that the art world, social scene, and the necessity to live my life according to that world was going to be for me. So I feel like I've always followed my own path. Yeah, the earliest things of curating or organizing things on my own came out of that feeling, that independent feeling.
Were there any standout professors or mentors that you can recall?
Oh yeah, I did have several, connections with professors that were really important. So at the School of Visual Arts, my two favorite artists that I worked with, and School of Visual Arts was a great place because it wasn't a conventional university. There were artists that just came in and out of their studios nearby and gave you a full blast of their personalities, their ideas, their experiences. And there was not a lot of pressure for them to conform to some sort of departmental program. And so it was pretty wild style. And I loved that. It was great. So I really was so fond of a painter named Bruce Boyce, who was just kind of the person that would give you permission. I felt like he gave me permission to just do my own thing, whatever it was. And he curated my work into a solo exhibition at the school when they had their gallery in Soho, which was a really tremendous honor. And it made me feel very confident. And then the other artist was Ellen Phelan, who was just like this total wild, crazy energy woman who came in and just said, there are no rules, you can do whatever you want. So I think this idea of giving permission, being given permission, and then in turn giving permission to others is also a big part of my career because I've done a lot of teaching.
That idea of continuing a tradition of permission is really, really fascinating. Tell me about your career as a teacher and an arts educator.
Well, my mother was a teacher, so again, I really am the total logical outcome of those two folks. My mother worked with teens. I have worked with teens throughout my career. My first official college teaching came at graduate school when I had a fellowship that included a job of teaching, and that was so inspiring to me to work directly with the undergrad students. And I run my courses at the college level, like studio classes, that way in a different way than some people do. I bring in writing and reading into those studio classes. And I know I'm not the only person that does that, but I also don't do group critiques.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I might be. I know there are other artists that don't do them either, but I find that's rare when I have conversations. I really think group critiques are unproductive, and I prefer to personal one-on-one coach to give group assignments and have everyone present and have other ways for students to interact with one another that are not about sitting there for 5 hours and everybody trying to say something smart without, to me, it was brutal and a slog when I was a student to sit through these critiques. I'm just impatient that way. And so, so I've done some college teaching, but I found early on that I preferred working with teenagers because I felt that there were so many artists out there that could teach at the college level really well, but that there were a lot of teens that don't get the benefit of being taught by an artist and getting that permission to do something creative on their own. And I worked with, from the beginning, I worked with teens that might have not had access to some of those things that I had growing up, like museums and, what's the great book to read? What's the great movie to see? Do you know what the Stravinsky's Rite of Spring is? Let's look at it. Just things that would open up a world for a young person who would never have been exposed. And so I felt like that was important. And a lot of artists don't like to work with teens. And I have a very strong commitment to making teenagers' lives more meaningful, because I think by and large in our culture we view teens as a nuisance, and they are almost adults. In many cultures they are adults, and in ours they they hang around at malls or they do stupid fast food jobs. I mean, I just felt like teens are amazing characters and they need some inspiration.
I completely agree with you, and definitely in terms of their artistic development, frequently, unless you're going to a highly competitive, performance and visual arts high school, right, there's not a lot of art education at the high school level that would prepare a teen for the sort of, conceptual and intellectual demands of like a private art school, even just in the first and second year. So the fact that you're introducing them to these different ways of thinking, not just the technical practice of art, right, but what's going on in their minds, what's happening emotionally, what are they truly seeing, what's being communicated here. I think that is very admirable of you.
Well, I enjoy it too, I feel like it's a challenge. I mean, sometimes I've worked with teens who are, we'll say, we use the word recalcitrant, like it's really a challenge because they have had problems and either they're involved in court proceedings or they're homeless or they have, anger problems or they've been abused, and they're going to, look at a person coming in and wanting to like share art with them and just feel like that's frivolous and they won't really care. And so you have to, it was a challenge to learn how to bond with people and find some commonality, and then to just have faith that you might put something in to somebody's life experience that they might not recognize at the time, but that it's there, and that later on they may remember it, and that they are enriched, even if they don't appear to be really participating or really caring in that moment. Sometimes teens get their spirits broken by their families, their schools, their communities, and they don't even know how to access that in themselves. And so I make an effort,
Absolutely. The population that you're describing is absolutely used to being discarded. So yeah, the fact that you continue to walk with them and persevere with them, I'm sure it's a very different message than the one they're used to hearing.
Yeah, it can be. And, it can be really rough. I mean, I have had times where I get really discouraged by the groups that I've worked with. And I've worked in the prison with girls, and sometimes just the prison staff are just so, like they just knock all of the hope out of everything you're trying to do. So it can be really hard.
So let's talk a little bit about your artistic practice. Describe for our viewers or our listeners your personal aesthetic.
Okay, that's a good one. My personal aesthetic. I feel like what I'm mostly concerned with is creating a pictorial space that feels inviting, in which the scenes and the objects in them could be in motion, that they're not fixed, that there are portals and exits and entrances between one work and the next, between a work and what might be behind it or conceptually somewhere through it. Whether I'm working in painting or drawing or collage, or even in public art, I feel like the influence of a theatrical space, a kind of shallow proscenium stage space in which objects can be performers, furniture, backdrops. So I always say my work is vivid backdrops for human activity. And I came up with that line as a way to sort of wrap up all the things that I do, whether I'm just drawing at home or in my studio on a small piece of paper, or whether I'm planning a large scale mural or public art thing. It's all to create an uplifting and imaginative space that humans can enjoy and be stimulated by.
So would you say that you're interested in that which occurs beyond the edges of the picture plane?
Yeah, I think I am. And I think that the fact of the fact that I make a lot of works in pairs, and they don't have to stay as pairs, but I see a left and a right side. And I don't know whether that has to do with the fact that I'm astrologically a Gemini. Somebody suggested that. And I was like, oh, maybe that's true. Or whether it's a like left brain, right brain thing, because I use left and right brain both in equal measure, constantly. Or whether it's about the painting being a picture, seeing into a space, but it is also an object in itself, and it references what's next to it or around it. And then I'll do pictures within pictures all the time.
So Michelle, you have an extensive history as a curator, creative director, and exhibition coordinator. What advice do you have for emerging and mid-career artists who are excited about getting their work out into galleries and exhibition spaces?
Well, I guess I have this, maybe it's an entrepreneurial spirit, maybe it's I want to do it my way kind of, streak in my personality. It may also have to do with the fact that I observed my dad, who was an architect, working from home. And he just sort of, you throw up your shingle and you do your work. And the art world seemed to have all of these stodgy behaviors and protocols for how things get done that seem to stymie original movement or a movement of any sort. All the like these concepts of like gatekeepers and blah blah blah. I really can't deal with that.
Right.
I prefer to be proactive, and I also like to as an artist, I'm uncomfortable with being represented by somebody else. So I think originally my first attempts to organize exhibitions come from my total engagement and love for the work of other artists, originally and initially my friends. There's nothing wrong with that. These are the artists that I have a good understanding of what they're doing because we're close and I see their work as it's developing. And I think that visual artists can take initiative and not wait for some magical divine hand to select them and to invite them. Again, remember, I didn't want to have to audition as a performing artist. I don't want permission from anyone else. I want to do what I do. So I'll create an opportunity for other artists, which I found kind of as part of presenting the work of other artists, your own work and your own person gets the spotlight as well. And that was interesting. And I actually found that earlier when I started to write about art, I found that if I would walk into a gallery and the folks there would know I was writing about the show, they were way more interested to talk with me than if I was an artist, because the idea of the artist would be, oh no, the artist wants to beg for some kind of attention, and can the artist show the work to the gallery, blah, blah, blah. But if I come into the gallery saying, yeah, I'm an artist, but I'm writing about art. And so I don't need you, but I'm doing this. It seemed that I could have these really nice relationships with galleries and nonprofit spaces and curators and museum people and all of that. So that was fun. It felt like more freeing than that expectation that I would be like wanting something from them. Yeah, so I think just go to it. And I liked, I'm always aware of, I hate the word branding, but I like a title for things. So I think if you're an artist, and many artists are doing this nowadays, the whole scene has changed so much from since I graduated from college and grad school, and that artist initiatives are like everywhere. And I'm delighted by that. So you give it a name. And that way it's not just you personally, it takes the pressure away from you personally, and you're discussing the existence of this entity that you've invented. And that entity has prerogatives and programming, and you could just invent an invisible museum, all on your own.
So by giving your project, your practice, your initiative a title, it becomes official and you legitimize it.
Yeah,
It's no longer just an abstract concept that may or may not happen. It's a real, you're really taking ownership of this and making it its own real entity.
yeah, definitely.
I love that. I think that is tremendous advice. And I'm going to roll that into the next question, which is, so if you're an artist and you have taken this step to acknowledge your own project, make it legitimate, give it a title, how do we roll that into getting grants and funding to support your project if you need it?
Right. That can be more challenging, and it's really good to just make long lists of potential alliances, donors, grant sources, and ways to collaborate. So if you're an independent curator who's an artist, and by the way, like the term curator, like I accept it because it's become so common that people use that term, but I have a certain sense of, now you hear the siren, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes I don't like to be called a curator because I feel like, oh, I didn't pursue an art history degree. I didn't set out to become a curator. I'm an artist who organizes exhibitions. I'm an artist who writes on art. I'm an artist who comes up with programming ideas, who teaches, who develops, whatever. So curator has, I can't fight it because it's just become too common a term
Right.
nowadays.
Right.
But I think that throughout history, artists and poets particularly have had a lot of fun making the public aware of different trends and things happening in contemporary art. And so I kind of view myself as part of that tradition. But in terms of funding, if you're not a nonprofit, if you don't have a 501c3 tax status, it's difficult to apply for to receive funding from most foundations and government agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So as an individual artist, you can apply for funding, and you can roll that funding into a project in which there is collaboration. And as part of your project, you can hire, you need to make a budget, you need to know how much things cost, and you can hire and or delegate aspects of your programming to other people. And in that way, funds, if there are any, can be distributed to others who are working with you, and that will create jobs and benefit other artists. You can find a fiscal sponsor who is a legitimate nonprofit who would agree to be the agent or sponsorship for your application to a foundation or a government agency. And then you can get funding for your project. In the state of Florida, a lot of artists do not realize that the state of Florida Division of Cultural Affairs offers grants directly to individuals for their own work and for projects. And you just have to go onto their website and read all that stuff really carefully and make phone calls and talk to the folks who work in the Division of Cultural Affairs in Tallahassee. And they're extremely helpful and give you guidance on what to apply for, how to do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, they are surprisingly accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of creative makers do not know that, especially artists working in Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, and they will also suggest, they'll say, oh, this grant is not the right one for you, but this one could be. So, there are ways to make your stuff happen. And then, a lot of artists are really good at connecting with businesses in their community that might want to help support the development of a project or promote the exhibition of a project if they can be involved. There are artists that work with, I started at one point this, I have this kind of organization called Available Space, and it was started with myself and two other women who are not artists. And our idea was to use empty commercial real estate spaces for temporary exhibitions by artists. And it's hard to make things happen sometimes. Sometimes there are way too many meetings spent and there are too many discussions about insurance. And so I lost my enthusiasm for that, but I did keep the name, which is now called Available Space Is Here.com or .org. Now I don't remember. Isn't that funny?
It's an excellent web address.
Okay, yeah. So it is my project that whenever I want to promote or present the work of another artist or another group, it goes there. And it doesn't have to be something happening in a real space, although I have done that, where artwork gets installed and is open to the public. It can be something that's online. It can be a publication. It can be collaboration. So it's a platform. And I love also the word flexible platform. I feel like that's my whole life and my whole career is a flexible platform. And the life of an artist should be just as creative as the work of the artist. So in my book, I don't feel like very rigid about how I do what I do. And this is good in this moment, especially of coronavirus pandemic, when it's very uncertain how many galleries will be able to survive, how many arts organizations will continue to be able to support the work of artists when their budgets are slashed. So it's a really good feeling to know that as a creative person, whether you're a curator or an artist, that you have a lot of power and your own ingenuity to make things happen. And that creative power is going to be really required in the days ahead, when financial remuneration might be a little bit thin on the ground.
Definitely. I think that does require a lot of artists to be able to look at their own practice from different angles. I think that conforming to a specific label, I am a painter, I am a sculptor, it can be something that helped you to gain identity in the beginning. But I think the ability to think about how your work could operate in different spaces, so in real physical spaces and then in virtual spaces, does it have a possible literary interpretation? Is there a collaboration that you could form that would help your work to exist in that way while supporting another artist? I think that this is something that you've done your whole career, but there are probably a lot of creatives that have not really been able to investigate that. So would you say that you're seeing much more of that from a lot of your peers and your colleagues right now?
I think some of them. I think some are reeling from the changes. Just like any other industry and small businesses, they are facing challenges of, can I afford my studio from now on if I don't have my job? Can I, my gallery closed? What can I expect, in the normal way that I would try to make some money from my work? I think the stress from having to shift gears is felt everywhere, even if you have a more bouncy ability in your career. So it's going to be a time of change, but there is always this change, whether we realize it or not. I mean, there never used to be such a fuss over art fairs. Nobody went to them. Nobody, artists never went to them. There weren't that many. And then, they became so important and so exciting as galleries were trying to compete with auction houses for the dollars, and art as an investment instrument, and all these things. We perceive these as gradual changes, but the pandemic has forced some radical, quick changes that we all have to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
And so being inventive and resourceful and collaborating. So for example, there's, our president has wanted to shut down the United States Postal Service. So there are artists circulating a project called, with hashtag Save the USPS Art Project. And it involves artists, like a pair of artists mailing each other a half completed work. And then each artist completes that work and they send it through the mail. So we're bringing things to the post office and mailing them. And then the work gets publicized via social media. So, that's a really small creative thing that can be done, that can generate a lot of participation and exposure and be really fun and actually have an impact. So there are lots of things that artists can come up with to keep the connection going, keep the art spirit alive and vibrant.
So the project that you just referenced, would
Mm-hmm.
you call that a subtle form of artist as activist?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, artist as activist, artist as collaborator, artist initiative. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there certainly are a lot of artists who work in that vein of social activism with their art and always have been. And then there are artists like myself who I don't explicitly generally address social and political issues in my work, but I do occasionally. I even just worked on, a drawing recently about all of the challenges that are just tumbling upon us like this crazy snowball effect. But I sort of believe overall that, all art is subversive in that we make objects or performances or writings or online experiences that do not conform to any kind of normal capitalist product. It's highly subjective. Our lives don't fit in to mainstream workaday.
Confines.
Yeah. So, our art is a place where the individual can be expressive in any way the individual wants to be, and there are no rules. And I feel like getting involved in that is something that elevates human life all around, and you don't have to make the topic of your work or the action of your work be explicitly political in order to be part of,
a social and political conversation.
To have an impact. Yeah.
Right.
So, I just feel like, for me, visual art is all about, I put something out there and then a million different people will take away a different message. So I feel like for me, it's not the best way to communicate political sentiments, which are specific.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do activism in other ways. I give money, I'll protest, I'll call my representatives, I'll vote, I'll, whatever I want to do, I'll volunteer, I'll promote the US Census, I'll take action in different ways to express my feelings about how I want our society to improve. But in my work, it's not always the best way for me to do that. I don't feel like I'm getting it done that way. I like to do other actions.
I think that it's very honest and very realistic of you to be able to say that your particular practice, or perhaps even visual art making in particular, it might not be able to satisfy, every part of that huge goal of,
Yeah.
being an activist and making a change.
Yeah.
So it is really multi-layered, and it can be a bit of a disarming, disorienting thing for an artist, who's being really propelled forward by their the authenticity that their role as an artist in their community allows them. I think that it can be very difficult to look at that and to actually say, my studio practice can only go so far, or it might be able to achieve these two things, but then not those two things. And we really need all four of them right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just think, again, it's, there are no rules. And I think each artist should find their peaceful level to work in all aspects of their work. Some artists have positions vis-a-vis like a marketplace of art, and they have different levels of agreement or participation in that. And I think it's not healthy or conducive to like really a full diverse art world to make artists feel like there's some kind of like they're compelled to make their art all of a sudden become an instrument of social change, if that's not how they viewed it in the past. And again, you can find, there are artists that work back and forth on a spectrum of these things too. So, maybe I'll say, oh, I really like this drawing that I started about the moment in time, and I may want to continue with those. And that would be right there in that particular selection of works, but it might not permeate everywhere. And that is legitimate, Yeah. I never represent myself as like a political artist or an activist artist or a community artist to anyone, because I feel like those are very specific types of practice that are being sought at the moment, especially. And I think it's wonderful and beautiful, and I'll not want to coerce myself to be a particular kind of artist, because that's what the demand is at the moment. The same way that when I was in school, the demand was for abstract expressionist paintings, and
Yes.
that was not my thing. And I just feel like these trends in the art world will come and go, and a question of being active socially is a life question. For me, it's not a studio question. I have a wonderful friend, and I'll quote her, a painter named Sharon Horvath, and she said to me, a painting is not an argument. And I thought that was a good way of putting it. And yes, I agree that, to me, the world of visual art is about like deconstructing expectations, creating unusual situations, provoking thought, provoking sensations, having like large, unwieldy aesthetic experiences that happen when you're in front of a work of art, that are unpredictable, that are uncontainable, that may not even be able to be expressed in words. And the messaging that's very explicit and specific in a political or social statement is something else.
Definitely.
So,
I think that there's a lot of fertile territory in works that don't really dictate a specific statement or position, but maybe, provoke a question. They pose a question and provide an entry point for people to start thinking about something. Well, let's talk about your greatest hits as far as coordinating exhibitions. Just off the top of your head, are there any quirky or weird or funny experiences that come to mind?
Really unusual and very rewarding experience was when I was invited to curate an exhibition of a Cuban painter whose work I did not know. and who I discovered was this incredible, inspiring touchstone for many Cuban artists. And she had a very unique career, Antonia Eris, and I curated this exhibition, I forget the year now. Anyhow, back at the Miami-Dade College Museum in the Freedom Tower.
Okay.
And I think it was an interesting choice to ask me to do this, and possibly because I'm not Cuban, the choice was made. And when I delved into reading and studying about her work and her life, and I talked with Cuban artists in Miami who I knew and asked about her, and they were all like, oh my God, she had such a profound influence on me as an artist, and I would not have become the artist I became without knowing her work. Then I made a decision to expand the exhibition to include the works of those artists. So, and in her work, she made artwork that was very socially engaged and was always making references to an audience or a crowd in her work. And so I titled the exhibition The Artist and Her Audience. And because I felt like, and just so you know, she made a decision to stop making art at a certain point and to kind of go underground. And she became an educator and worked with people in the country and families and children and made puppets and things like that. And she stopped painting. And then later on, she came back to painting, and then she died. So her work was very ambitious in its scale and its scope, and she really did have a profound effect on all these other people. So it was so cool to see her work in person and install her work in this beautiful giant space in the Freedom Tower, and then to install works that were related or inspired by her of living artists, most of them living, not all, but who claimed her as inspiration at some point in their lives. And that was great.
Throughout this whole conversation, I think one of the things that really, really stands out to me is the tremendous amount of respect that you really do give to groups or individuals that are often considered, as you said, a nuisance or insignificant or peripheral. You know, you talked earlier on about how teenagers are normally disregarded or seen as just being troublesome, and we'll just wait for them to grow out of it. And you really give them a lot of your time and consideration. You spoke as well about how artists are often received when they walk into a gallery as nuisances a little bit as well. You know, they're inevitably going to be asking for something, or they want something, or, you know, just another artist coming in wanting to promote their work. So you're aware of that perception, you know, and then probably throughout working as an artist yourself, you give a lot of respect to the artists whose work you are presenting. You really do prioritize their intentions, their needs, their objectives within their work. And I just hear a huge amount of empathy and respect for these groups and individuals that are often disregarded, or they're not given the respect and the conscientious treatment that they really deserve. Do you think that is something that's true about yourself?
Well, I try. You know, I would like to say that's my aim. You know, I'm not happy unless everybody's happy. You know, that's something that I know about myself. So I wouldn't feel good if something I started engendered bad feelings in some way. I can't be naive and say that would never happen. You know, sometimes it's just part of working with other people. And I really, you know, I am control freaky enough to try to see my vision happen. You know, I am, like I said, a creative person and I have a vision, but at the same time without like stomping over somebody else who's participating. So that's the difference between being the individual artist in my studio versus working in the art, you know, community.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to be able to share your story with our listeners. It's been such a delight to learn more about your particular ethos and your overarching priorities and goals, because there are a lot of connections between your artistic practice and then what you've achieved over time as an exhibition coordinator and a curator. Even though I know that's not your favorite title to use, you definitely
Okay.
are one.
Yeah, like I said, I can't fight it. It's just
Yeah.
what they say, you know, so it's
You definitely can't avoid it. You know, and that landscape of what a curator is has just, it's changed and evolved and kind of mutated so much.
yeah.
But your professional record, it does scream curator. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you,
It's
Taryn.
been an honor to talk with you.
Likewise, it's been so fun, and I'm really glad to, connect with your audience too.
Yeah, and I very much look forward to seeing you again in person when you're back in town.
You got it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.